What if Naruto was a hidden genius and every girl in Konoha fell for him? Chapter 1. Crimson Dawn. Uzumaki Naruto. The sky was painted red as the familiar light of the sun began to creep up onto the skyline. The Hokage faces then gained their unusual rugged luster that made it seem as if the stone faces were somehow luminescent. From where he was standing, Naruto couldn't help but admire the sight. His facial expression was somewhat constricted, taut, hiding beneath it the more jovial expression that remained unseen under the guise of an impassive visage. There was something about the Hokage faces in the morning that made him want to stop whatever he was doing and look at them. The sight of what he was to become was there, right in front of him. He was so close yet so far. That was why he did this every morning. As soon as he would wake up, before he did anything else, the first thing that he would do was go onto the roof of his house and stare at the stone faces. This soothing and silent daily ritual was a constant reminder of why he was still even in this piece of shit village. Naruto inhaled sharply, exhaling with a sigh as a cool morning breeze caught the back of his neck, sending shivers down his spine. Today would be his first day at the Ninja Academy, and he would be entering it as the fabled bane of Konoha, the failure, and not what most people should have seen him as, a true genius. As Naruto took a step back, he spun around on his heel and began to walk back into his shabby little apartment. His footsteps came to a sudden halt when he felt who it was that was standing behind him. "I suppose you're another one who came to eliminate me, A small smirk appeared on his face as he realized that the man standing behind him had simply pulled out a kunai. "Aren't going to answer me, at least badmouth me like the rest of them did," Naruto suggested before he spun around once again. When he turned, he centered his gaze onto a tall man with shaggy black hair and beady eyes that matched in color. He wore a standard Jonin vest, indicating what rank he was, and his face laced with a thin coat of early morning perspiration. Honestly, Naruto could not tell whether or not the morning air produced the man's bit of sheen or whether it had been created by his growing fear of Naruto. The fact that Naruto did not have that same coat of perspiration confirmed that it could not have been the humid air, but it was in fact the latter. Which brought Naruto's deeply complex mind to the conclusion that this black-haired Jonin was afraid of him. If so, then why try to attack him? Then, without giving it much thought, Naruto decided to ask the question circling his mind out into the air. "If you are so afraid of me, then why are attempting to assassinate me?" Naruto's intense gaze locked onto the Jonin's own wavering one. After shifting his eyes from the floor to Naruto, then back to the floor, he responded. "Because demons like you don't deserve to live," yelled the Jonin as he charged at Naruto, kunai in hand. In a split second, Naruto could see that the man's determination to kill him was as strong as ever, like a steel chain that refused to be broken. Whatever vendetta the Jonin may have had against him, Naruto was completely unaware of and did not bother to ask. Personal grudges were things that could corrupt even the greatest of warriors. Even so, to foolishly attack someone solely on the matter of a grudge was unacceptable when it came to Naruto's standards. If he had to be honest with himself, he would have to say that the quality of ninja had fallen in Konoha, and to his dismay, he was unfortunate enough to be born in with and after 2 generations of worthless shinobi. He would have to talk with Oji-san about that later. The foolish Jonin's position was horrible. It was like some form of a porous taijutsu stance, full of openings and potential counters as well. Naruto knew not to kill him, but it was always fun teasing those who contended to take his life. With one quick motion, Naruto dipped under a wild swipe and clipped the man off his feet. Before he could get up, Naruto pressed his bare foot against the back of the man's head, smashing his face into the concrete roof and knocking him unconscious. As the last of the man's moans and groans of pain died out, Naruto suddenly felt a superb sense of vindication. It was hardly a battle to be proud of. Hell, It was hardly a battle at all, but Naruto always seemed to find some feeling of pride whenever he discomfited the futile efforts of his would-be assassins. Slowly Naruto grabbed the back of the man's collar and make one-hand seal, disappeared in a swirl of leaves generated by some artificial wind. Naruto reappeared in the Sandame's office, with his unwanted guest still hanging him by the nape of his collar. Naruto looked up to see the third Hokage sitting at his desk with his hands folded. At the sight of the unconscious Jonin, the old man just slapped his forehead and sighed heavily. Another one. How many times has it been this week? 2. What 3 attempts to take your life? Naruto simply nodded at the last number the Hokage stated. I thought so, he said, his expression looking surprisingly lugubrious, contrary to his normal impassive state of face. This man, Naruto hefted up the Jonin with one arm, hanging him into the air, so rudely interrupted my morning and tried to kill me. Don't worry, I did not harm him. The worst of his injuries is probably a broken nose. Would you be so kind as to make sure that he gets sent to Ibiki and so rightfully gets what he deserves? Sure thing, Naruto-kun. I will keep note of your request. But I think that now would be the time for you to leave. And why would I do that? Naruto asked, putting on some fake schoolboy charm. The Sandame just grimaced and sighed once more. Because Naruto, you're in your pajamas. Naruto's eyes widened a little bit. He had almost forgotten that he was wearing them. The blonde just scratched the side of his head, in an obviously false bit of confusion. Oh, and what's the problem with that? For all of your uncanny perceptiveness, Naruto-kun, you sure seem to not notice that I myself have company and, before you came, was in a very serious discussion with my subordinates. Slowly Naruto began to turn around as the old Sarutobi stuck his arm out, swaying it from one side to the other, as he was trying to display some oddly antique trinket. Naruto, allowing his body to follow his grandfather's gesture, turned fully around, only to come face to face with 3 Anbu shinobi. They all wore their distinct animal mask accordingly. The one on the left, who took on the likeness of an eagle, the on the right wore the mask portraying the face that Naruto for some odd reason mistook as that of a baboon. Finally, the Anbu in the middle, who was with no doubt the captain, wore the oddly modified and makeshift visage of a tiger. Although the boy could not see it, he could not help but think that the 3 Anbu all had their mouths agape behind the effective obscurity of their mask. They probably couldn't believe that the brat, the lowest of the low, the bane of Konoha, had defeated a Jonin while he wasn't an academy student yet, and he did it all in his PJs. Naruto mentally prided himself at the sight of the subtle shock. Even an Anbu couldn't hide their emotions from the ever-perceptive Naruto. However, he did not act upon his thoughts and simply stared at them, creating an awkward tension in the room. His eyes darted on and off the 3 individuals before him until the weird sensation that arose in his gut forced him to look away and back toward the third. Sorry for the interruption, OG-san. Nevertheless, before I leave, I simply must make a comment on the way shinobi are acting nowadays. Honestly, the overall mindset of shinobi in Konoha today has suffered a serious downgrade from what it used to be. It's actually making me question the merit and literal quality of the ninja in our village. That goes for all levels. That comment caused him a series of 3 loud coughs from behind that were obviously meant as a joke and obviously directed at him. Anyway, like I was saying, I simply suggest that you input more of your time into enforcing the law of shinobi decorum around the village, because I don't think that this man here, he pointed to the brunette Jonin who he still subconsciously had dangling from his hand, attacked me just because of my unfortunate condition here, the way he held his blade, with determination, with fear, with anger. It was obvious that he had some sort of personal vendetta against my prisoner and me. It would be foolish to let all shinobi in Konoha harbor a mindset so wrong like this man here. With that said, Naruto dropped the man to the floor. A loud thump indicated that he had landed on his head. He gave Sarutobi a curt bow and smile followed by the same action being performed to the three Anbu in the room. I'm sorry to have taken your time. With that Naruto made the hand seal that he used to bring himself to the Hokage's office in the first. Wait, Naruto-kun, how did you know that this man attacked you because some grudge? Sarutobi asked with an amused expression on his face. Being as perceptive as he was, Naruto knew that the third was even more perceptive than he was. Moreover, because of that he knew that the old man never asked him questions like that unless he was trying to gauge Naruto's skill at reading people. However, for every smart question that Sarutobi asked him, Naruto had an equally smart or even smarter question waiting for the old man. This time the blonde genius was at a loss. Let's just call it a hunch, Naruto said. Sarutobi chuckled. Have a nice day at the academy, Naruto. It's the first day, you know I will, Naruto said with a smile before disappearing in a swirl of leaves much as he intended to do before. As the blonde boy faded from vision, the Anbu tiger in the middle spoke up. So that's Uzumaki Naruto, the infamous bane of Konoha. Yes, and it would do you well not to look at him like other people do, Saito. And what would that be, Hokage-sama? Saito asked, inclining his head. As a demon and a failure, when in fact he is very much the opposite. He is a genius. Saito was silent after that. If the Hokage felt so strongly about this boy that he would go so far and call him a genius, then it was apparent that the kid was the real deal. He had heard stories about the boy who was Kyuubi's vessel, but he had heard otherwise from what the Hokage mentioned. Now his mind was swarming with a mass of curiosity, and it continued to swarm and buzz around the one question, the centerpiece that was brought to his attention. Exactly who was Uzumaki Naruto? XXXXXXXXX. Naruto arrived at the front gates of the Ninja Academy like any other kid his age would. He walked. It was a tad slow for his taste, but every once in a while it felt good to act normal for once. However, acting was all that it was. There was nothing in or of the boy that when compared to other children his age would be considered normal. Not his mind, not his speech, not his intelligence, and definitely not the giant demonic fox sealed away into his abdomen. But putting those qualities aside, Naruto was still, moderately, normal. While walking through the huge gates he suddenly remembered what it was that Oji-san had told him about 2 days ago. Naruto, now that you're going to be joining other students around your age, I want you to act your age. He said. Why? Does it really matter? Naruto asked. Yes, it does. I'm not saying that you should act like a complete idiot and withhold back every bit of knowledge that you have so far retained. I'm just saying that if want to be treated differently, then it would be in your best interest to act the same. Kids your age don't usually possess information about the things that you do, so basically what I'm saying is don't show off. Hi, Naruto responded. That is what he intended to do. He planned on coming to the academy and not show off his skills. The reason for him starting the academy in the first place was so that he would advance in his ninja rank. If he were to ever attain his dream of becoming Hokage, then he would at least have to become a genin first. As Naruto continued to walk toward the front door of the academy, he suddenly froze, taken by shock. Around him, he noticed dozens of kids being dropped off by their parents, kids his age giving goodbye hugs to their loved ones as they began their first days of school. Just like them, he had made it here. His first step to becoming an actual shinobi. Too bad he didn't have anyone to share the moment with. Naruto had often thought what it would be like if he had parents, but today that thought became all the more important to him. He wanted someone to hug goodbye like everyone else. Unfortunately, he was not blessed with a family like other kids were. But then again, other kids were not blessed with a mind and body like his. He was cut from his introspective thoughts when he heard someone's voice. Hey, are you lost, or what? Naruto's head snapped to the source of the voice. When he looked up he saw. What the hell was he seeing? He didn't know whether or not he was looking at a person or a ghost. The person in front of him was the very image of the word noble. The man in front of him had jet black hair that ran down past his shoulders and was left to hang loosely. He wore robes of pure white. From where he stood, the man's robes seemed to avoid touching the ground and just hovered lightly above the dirt, as if the most likely soft linen was tantalizing the ground because it could not be touched by the ground. It was what gave him the ghost-like appearance and what made him noble. Even in the dirtiest and dustiest of places, the clothing of a noble refused to dirty itself. Despite his absurdly clean attire, Naruto noticed some other distinct features on the man, like the structure of his jaw and the intensity of his eyes. Oh, and his eyes. His eyes were the most distinguishable feature about him, for they were white and pupil-less. This man standing in front of him was a Hyuga. From what he had seen, Naruto knew that Hyugas were supposed to be stuck-up douchebags. Well, are you going to answer me or are you going to just stand there like a silent fool? Yep, he was right. This person was definitely a douche. No, I'm not lost. Actually, I was just on my way to class. It's my first day, Naruto said with such cool innocence that seemed to ignite the much larger man even more, although his emotionless face mask that all Hyugas seemed to wear at all times seemed to aid in hiding it. Even so, that didn't mean that Naruto still couldn't read the man's actions. He could tell by the slight twitch of the Hyuga's fingers when he spoke and the barely visible 1 mm arch in his eyebrows that the white-eyed ghost was enraged merely at the concept of standing next to him. Again, the Kyuubi no Kitsune caused someone to judge him before they got to know him. And they let you of all people in. What a shame. It seems that Konoha has fallen down to low standards this year. Well, I do beg your pardon. But what exactly do you mean by they let me of all people in? Nothing at all. I thought as much. Naruto smirked as the man simply swallowed down the massive amount of Hyuga pride that his clan was so famous for and turned around, facing a girl who up until now Naruto hadn't noticed. Hinata. This is important. This is where it starts for you. If you fail, then you will have lost all honors from me. By the end of today, I want an oral report of today's happenings and a sense of your status in the classroom. You are a Hyuga, so I expect you to behave as such. From what Naruto could see, a girl around his size stood virtually petrified in front of the Hyuga. She hid it with a mask of impassiveness. She was hiding her fear that both Naruto and the male Hyuga knew it. IW will try my best. No, you will be the best. Understood. Hinata nodded. Yes, father, Hinata said, her eyes a bit downcast. The man just nodded and turned around, with a grace that only a Hyuga would possess. He gave Naruto one last huff before walking past him and out of the academy gates. Naruto could tell that the man had just resisted the urge to sputter out any further words. Perhaps he was afraid of breaking the law that the Sandaime had put into action by uttering one too many words about the nine-tailed fox. So now Naruto was just standing with some girl who he now knew to be Hyuga Hinata. In addition, from his own general knowledge, she was the heir to the Hyuga clan, therefore making the previous man whom she'd called Father Hyuga Hiyashi the most Hyuga you could ever know. Naruto, always being one to break the awkward silence between the two, spoke up first. So, you're a Hyuga? Her head quickly shot up, as she looked at Naruto, only to bring her gaze back down to the ground. Why yes, she said. Naruto was a master at reading people, and it was obvious that she had definite self-esteem issues to work out. He could tell that it was a fact just by looking at the way she stared at the ground. Call it a hunch, but he could tell that Hinata was extremely nervous for some reason, which made it even more surprising to him when she spoke. Anyo, but I've never seen anyone talk to father like that. Weren't you scared of him? Naruto grabbed his chin between his forefinger and his thumb. Well, a little, but you just got to know how to speak to them. No offense, but the Hyuga are an extremely intimidating clan, if you don't know how to keep your cool around them. Hinata just nodded and returned her gaze to the ground. By this time the both of them were walking toward the front door along with the rest of the students, when Naruto stopped and said, "Oh, wait, you go ahead, I've got to get something really quickly." Slowly the lavender-eyed girl nodded, her lower lip hanging a bit, and continued into the academy with the rest of the students. As the last of the students said goodbye to their parents and went inside, Naruto slipped off to a distant corner behind the school where no one could spot him. He came to a stop underneath a tree that cast a lengthy shadow that would do well and hide his presence. Hanging from a sturdy branch was a lone swing. There it stood, gently moving in unison with every minuscule breeze that moved it. There Naruto sat down. "How long do you plan on following me?" Naruto said, looking further up into the branches of the large tree. There was a slight rustling of leaves when an Anbu nin jumped down from the tree. He was wearing a tiger mask. If Naruto's memory served him correctly, this was the same captain that he had seen in Oji-san's office in the morning. Then the idea came to Naruto that Gramps might have requested that they keep watch over him and report back if a problem were to arise. Naruto mentally sighed. That is so like Oji-san. He thought to himself, well, if you're not going to answer me, then I'll just assume that the third sent you, correct? The tiger-faced Anbu just nodded. For what reason? On that question, the masked nin reached into one of the pockets that were strewn about his gray vest and pulled out a small red scroll that Naruto himself knew was a message from the Sandaime. Naruto stuck his hand out and the scroll made the transition from the Anbu's hand to Naruto's much smaller hand. The Anbu spoke up. He told me that you needed to sign this before you entered for your first day at the academy. It is a proposal, for you to join the Anbu by next year when you graduate and become a genin. For this to work, you'll need to sign this before the proposal is made, and in about a year's time, after much negotiations with the council, you will be admitted to join the Anbu. Naruto raised an eyebrow. It was obvious that Oji-san planned for this to happen. It was strangely odd that this person said that it would take a year for the whole process to be over and done with, and what do you know, Naruto was now entering his first year as an academy student. Naruto chuckled. Tell Oji-san that I said, no. The Anbu's head suddenly flickered up in shock. What do you mean no? Naruto-san, you're passing up a chance that rarely comes to those around your age. It wouldn't be wise to pass up a chance of this much value and rarity. Listen. What's your name? Yuji Saito. My name's Saito. Why? Listen, Saito. Rarity or not, me becoming an Anbu member is up to me and me only. Even though I'm already able to join the Anbu squads as I am now, I simply have no interest in joining. And I doubt that getting the council to pass me into the Anbu Black Ops will not be as easy as you have just now stated. In reality, I don't feel like dealing with the hassle and bullshit that I know the council, both shinobi and citizen alike, will so generously hand me. Do you honestly feel that way? Yes. I'm not interested. Naruto then handed him the red scroll back, which Saito slipped back into the pocket from whence it came. But tell Oji-san that to save that proposal, in the future I might be interested. Understood, Saito said with a curt bow. You really are the real deal. Hopefully in the future I may have the privilege of working with you on my squad. Maybe, Naruto responded. With that the Anbu captain disappeared. Without a trace, no leaves, no wind, no smoke, nothing at all. He just disappeared. How do they do that? I might consider joining just so I can learn how the hell they do that. Naruto then hopped off the swing and walked back to the front of the academy. He couldn't believe that it was his first day and that he was already late. XXXXXXXXX 1 year later. Naruto let out an exasperated sigh as he stared aimlessly into the distance the window had to his delight, provided for him. He was staring out the window of his classroom and he was seriously bored with this place. He had wasted an entire year in this academy learning things that he had learned when he was 7. He found it useless to sit here in a class that gave him no challenge such as this one. Although this class proved to be interesting at times, he still could not see the point in paying attention to things that, frankly, would do him no good in actual battle. At his level, an enemy that he would encounter would, with no doubt in his mind, require much more than academy-taught tactics to defeat. It just went to show a person exactly how strong Naruto was and how strong he led others to believe he was. For an entire year Naruto had stayed in the academy solely for the purpose of becoming a genin, and while he was here he hadn't shown anyone a bit of what he could really do. Every time he was called to demonstrate some low-level technique of some sort in front of the class, he would always make sure that he always gave the instructors the required minimum that they had asked for. In doing that, Naruto's ranking in the class always remained at a constant neutral zone. That was good enough for him. Naruto, are you even paying attention? Naruto looked in the general direction of the person's voice. He looked up to see his teacher, Umino Iruka. Over the course of this year Iruka had become in Naruto's eyes, a father figure. He was the only other person besides the third that the blonde ever was seen around. Most of the time it was at Ichiraku's ramen shop or just walking around. Iruka, unlike everyone else, actually saw him for who he was and not as the demon that destroyed the town. Yes, Iruka, I'm paying attention. Oh really? Then would you demonstrate to the class what a proper henge of our Hokage would look like? Do I have to? I'd much rather just sit down. This comment earned the boy a series of suppressed chuckles made by the other kids in the class. As Naruto continued to look at Iruka, he noticed a vein popping put from the man's forehead. You okay, Iruka? That's Iruka-sensei, Naruto. In here I am your teacher. Now get your behind up here and do what I asked you to. Fine, Iruka. Ah, Iruka-sensei. Naruto slowly got up to the front of the class. He paused for a moment, taking the time to look at the children whom he was forced to call classmates for an entire year. The faces of those whom he had taken a liking to, but then again there were some people here whom he couldn't stand. Naruto's eyes shifted to a certain black-haired Uchiha named Sasuke who was staring out the window much he was only a moment ago. Then his gaze scanned the room, going over each and every girl who had deemed themselves part of the Uchiha fan club, then going over to the girl who declared herself president, Haruno Sakura. He couldn't stand her. Just the thought of how she fawned over the Uchiha was enough to sicken him. The pink-haired girl was truly desperate. But just because there was one fan club didn't mean that Sasuke was the only one with admirers. Over the course of these many months Naruto himself had accumulated a fair amount of female attention that in his mind had the ability to compete with Sasuke's own admirers. But just because he had fangirls didn't mean that he was particularly proud of the fact. His eyes then moved over to the girl who declared herself as president of his fan club. She had dark purple hair and white eyes, Hyuga Hinata. He didn't hate her at all, which is more than he could say for the other girls who had taken a liking to him. As he locked eyes with her, she shuddered and brought her head down to her fingers, which she just so happened to be pressing together at the time. Well, Mr. Uzumaki, Iruka said impatiently. Naruto turned his head over to Iruka, and gave him a very grim glare, which Iruka himself returned with a death glare of his own. It had become their thing to glare at each other intensely when there was nothing serious. It constantly reminded them of how close they actually were to each other, whether they knew it or not. Hi, Iruka-sensei, Naruto said while making a single hand seal. A light haze of blue chakra enveloped his body, and after a spontaneous generation of smoke, what was once Naruto had become a perfect copy of the Sandaime Hokage. In the visage of the village head, Naruto turned his head toward Iruka, the eyes of a wise man staring intensely at the Chunin. May I take my seat now? Oh, Naruto. Well done, you can sit down, now, Iruka said, sounding slightly defeated due to the fact that Naruto had completely proven him wrong and was in fact paying attention. Well, at least that's what Naruto led him to believe. Things were so easy for the boy that he really did not have to pay attention. Things like that were second nature to Naruto. Thank you, Naruto said as he went back to his seat. On his way back he couldn't help but notice the many murmurs and whispers being made, most of which contained his name. Still, despite the great adulation flowing toward him, Naruto just sighed lazily and took his corner spot back at the window so that he may relax and tune Iruka out for the rest of the lesson. He would make it up to the man though. Maybe some miso ramen after class would help settle his debt for not paying attention in class. As Naruto's mind slowly slipped into the world of daydreams once more, Iruka's had reduced itself in his mind to little more than a smothered muffle, sounded like a person trying to speak underwater. Now Naruto was back in his peaceful place, where he could not be bothered, where he could not be perturbed, where no one could reach him. Naruto jerked when he felt the odd sensation of someone jabbing him in his ribs. Maybe his peaceful place wasn't as impenetrable as he would have liked it to be. Naruto turned and saw a girl with shoulder-length jet black hair and blue eyes looking at him. Her elbow was slightly extended toward his ribcage, indicating that she was the one who poked him. She wore a tan ninja training shirt underneath a faded black jacket that was tightly suited to accentuate her body. On her lower body she sported a pair of ninja training pants that were identical in color to her shirt. Those two were tightly suited. Her pale skin seemed to go in conjunction with her hair and eyes. This was an odd combination, gave her what Naruto would label as slightly refined facial features. Saying that she was pretty would be horribly tautological and, quite frankly, the understatement of the century. Naruto, did you not just get in trouble for daydreaming? She whispered. Ah, come on Sanae, you know that I don't have to pay attention in this class. Naruto said with a disarming smile. He knew this girl as Fumina Sanae. He had met her within the first week that he began the academy. Naruto then heard another whisper come from behind him. Yes you do, Naruto-kun, you'll fail if you don't pay attention. Naruto turned his head and saw behind him another girl. Her hair was dark as well, but not black like Sanae's. It was more of a dark auburn that when in the right light could be considered red. She wore a light blue shirt that loosely draped over her body and dark navy blue ninja training pants. Her face was smaller and even more refined than Sanae's, but it bore a stark resemblance to the black-haired girl. The only reason that such a resemblance was even present was solely based on the fact that this was Sanae's sister. Her name was Konoha. Naruto met her around the same time he met Sanae, seeing as how they were always together, and just like her sister Sanae, Naruto had become great friends with Konoha as well. To say that Naruto had become friends with them was an understatement. He had become attracted to them both in a wasn't the type of attraction that everyone who saw them would think of, but it's not like there was no reason to be attracted to them. Half of the guys in Naruto's class were attracted to them both. The two sisters' beauty had made them into daily eye candy for most of the other male students. Sure, they were pretty, but that was not the only reason that Naruto was attracted to them. While not one of the clans known for their outstanding strength or Kekkei Genkei, the Fuminas were known, however, for their extreme cunning and wit. They were not as strong as clans like the Hyuga were or Uchiha were, but they certainly made up for their physical impediments with their extreme intelligence. Fuminas were extremely smart. One example of their wiles would be during the Great Shinobi War, where the battle tactics of a Fumina led Konoha to victory against opposing Iwa forces. The end result of that battle was a dangerous depletion of the Iwa's forces that ended up with them losing up to half of their entire military. It would be a sin to say that a Fumina wasn't intelligent. It was not only their looks that Naruto liked about them, but their Fumina wit as well. Like him, they strove to think in the most logical way possible and did not settle to leave anything unanswered. It was what he enjoyed about their presence, the fact that they were like him. While they were not like him when it came to strength, for he was many times stronger than they were like him when it came to their minds. In other words, they were geniuses, and Naruto had always liked to surround himself with those who were similar to him. No, I won't, Kono-chan. This class is way too easy to fail. Too bad Sanae-chan here doesn't see that. Naruto was suddenly assaulted by the intense feeling of another nudge to the ribs. I told you not to add the chan to my name, you idiot. You know how much I hate it, Sanae said in a barely suppressed whisper. Ah, but it makes you angry when I say that, and you're cute when you're angry. Sanae said nothing and inched her head back a few inches, an intense blush staining her face a bright red. Kono couldn't help but giggle at this. Well, that is until her sister gave her a patented Naruto death glare. Naruto always knew how to get inside of Sanae's head. For such an outstanding genius, the girl was also an outstanding prude as well. Hey, pay attention. Instantly all three of them snapped towards the sound of the loud voice, which was a very irritated Iruka. Naruto, Sanae, Kono, do you intend on talking this entire class? What I'm about to say is of great importance, so you must pay attention, understood? Hi, Iruka-sensei, Naruto said, answering for all of three of them. Iruka nodded and turned his gaze back to the rest of the class. He brought his two hands, and while making a fist with one hand, his other hand was left open. He suddenly brought them together. Class, as you all know, today is the day of the advancement exam. This comment stirred up a multitude of groans and moans from the rest of the class, with the exception of a few well-behaved students. I know. Settle down, it's not that serious. It's simple. A hand sign, and behind appeared two small wooden tables, and on top of the tables were rows of hiteites or ninja headbands, all engraved with the Konoha symbol and shining brightly, indicating that had just been burnished. Iruka turned and allowed his arm to sway out toward the two tables. These headbands are what you will be aiming for. If you pass, you will each receive one hiteite, indicating that you have become official ninja of Konoha. The exam itself is simple really. I will call you up here one by one, and I will ask you to do three things. 1. Make a decent henge of me or Mizuki-sensei, who will be here shortly. 2. Make a total of 3 stable bunshin. And 3. Iruka then smiled. The third thing that you will have to do in order to become official nin of Konoha is walk past me and take your hiteite. Iruka smiled when he saw the bright smiles of his students and heard their excited voices. Some of them even got so excited that they stood up, saying that they wanted to be the first to go. But Iruka denied, telling them wait. The exam will not begin now, however. Iruka's smile grew wider when heard his class cry out, "Oh!" again, with the exception of the more well-behaved students in the class. Don't worry, we have to wait for Mizuki to return, therefore I will allot you all a small break period of 15 minutes. Be back in class by then. Hey, and don't take this break lightly, you could use this to your advantage. Perhaps these 15 minutes could give you all a little time to prepare for the exam. Other than that, you are dismissed. With that, all of the students jumped up, some louder than others, and began leaving the classroom. Naruto then felt the terrible sensation of Sanae's elbow in his ribs once more. This will be fun, won't it? Naruto nodded. Nah, I don't think it will. Things like this usually bore me to death. He then smiled at the scowl that made its way onto Sanae's face, but grimaced when he felt another dull pain enter his ribs on his opposite side. He turned to see Kono standing there. Well, they only bore you because you don't know how to have fun. Already tired of this interminable assault of elbow nudges, Naruto sighed. Whatever, let's just leave, he said as he walked out of the classroom, holding both sides of his ribs. Both girls both giggled and slapped hands, following him out of the room. It seems as if they had succeeded in successfully ticking Naruto off with the elbow nudging, which they both knew was one thing he hated, which was the reason they did it so much. XXXXXXXXX. Naruto sat on the sturdy branch of his usual tree with a swing on it. Ever since his first day at the academy, it had become his spot, the type of place that allowed him to think peacefully to himself. But inner thoughts did not seem like options for him right now. "Come on," Sanae said, grabbing hold of Naruto's arm and trying to pull him off his branch. She was currently standing on the side of a tree trying to pull Naruto down. Even though they were not up to his level yet, the Fumina sisters were enamored with the knowledge of techniques that were well beyond academy level, for example the technique of tree walking that Sanae had been using to follow Naruto up his tree and bug him for what seemed in his mind as an interminable amount of time. "We've got 15 minutes, so spar with us," Sanae urged, to which Naruto just shook his head. Since his beginning days at the academy, Sanae had always wanted to spar with Naruto, but he always denied. She was just too below him. "No, I don't feel like it, so stop bugging me." "Why?" "Because I said so," Naruto responded. If he had actually told them the truth behind his reasons for not fighting them, and mentioned that if Sanae were to fight him she would be fighting someone who had trained almost every day of his life with the Hokage of the village since he was about 7. She probably wouldn't be so eager to have a bout with him then. As Sanae gave Naruto's one final tug but sighed when he did not budge. She let go, but before she could get halfway down the tree, she let out a startled squeak as she felt something land on top of her, knocking her down only for her to land flat on her stomach. When she hit the ground and turned her head, she saw Naruto sitting right on top of her. There was a certain sly look in his eye that made her feel suddenly uncomfortable. She felt even more on edge when he leaned in closer to her face. Instead of sparring, how about we do something else, Sanae-chan." The tone in which he spoke brought fire to Sanae's face as she blushed. "Why, you know that I don't like it when you call me Chan," she said, her speech chopped into bits and pieces. "Oh really? Then how about this?" Sanae's eyes widened when he felt Naruto's hand slowly slide down the side of her rib and move up toward her chest. Under Naruto's weight, which he held back a bit, Sanae squirmed and struggled in an attempt to free her body. "And Naruto, what are you doing?" "Oh, nothing," he said, sliding his fingers across the base of her C-cup-sized chest. Much to his pleasure, Sanae did nothing but let out a small squeaky moan. But it was not like she could do anything else. Naruto had her pinned and playing the part of the victim. "Naruto, stop, you pervert." "I'm not a pervert. I just felt like getting my revenge on you. You bug me, I make you feel uncomfortable." He leaned in even closer. "Now is that not that fair?" Naruto moved in closer but jerked back when he felt the structure of a foot jam itself into his ribs. "Naruto, what are you doing? I don't want you touching my sister in any weird places, you perv." Naruto looked up, while rubbing his side. That one was going to leave a mark. "Again with this perv thing. I am not a pervert, I just felt like getting your sister back for bugging me." Kono looked at Naruto skeptically, but dismissed it as nothing important. "But it is not like things like this didn't happen often, they happened all the time. Sanae would bug Naruto, then Naruto would get her back by attacking the prude within her and him doing something that he did not count as perverted but rather as revenge. Therefore, over time Kono had become sort of the guardian who always stopped Naruto from exacting too much revenge on her sister. However, being as perceptive as he was, Naruto quickly became fully aware of why she always played this role. It was simple. She obviously held certain feelings of affection for Naruto as well, but she just did a better job of hiding it. Maybe the only reason Kono stopped Naruto all the time was that she felt jealous from all of the attention that Naruto usually gave Sanae whenever she bugged him. Naruto raised himself off the ground, dusting himself off. "Well, if you plan on bugging me, then what is it that you propose that we should do in?" He looked at the position of the sun in the sky. "The 10 minutes we have left." Both girls shrugged. Well then bye, said Naruto as his body began to fade away into nothing until there was in fact nothing standing in his place. With wide eyes both girls looked at each other, shocked at how easily Naruto had bamboozled them with a mere bunshin. Whether he had switched with the clone before they found him or during their conversation, they did not know. Then a thought came to Kono that made her angle her head and rested it on the palm of her hand. She turned to Sanae. Hey Sanae, if those were just bunshin then how come it could touch you and why was I able to kick? Sanae herself then adopted the same thinking pose as her sister. Wait, yeah, now that I think about it, that clone felt real, but it was still a clone, wasn't it? Both sisters stood frozen, pondering on the question of just what it was that Naruto did to his bunshin to make them physically able to touch. We've got to find Naruto, and fast, Kono said, dashing off, soon to be followed by her sister who yelled something that sounded like, wait up. XXXXXXX. Naruto smiled as he got the mental information that his clone relayed to him. That was a good thing about his clones. If they were to do something like train or learn a new technique, the real Naruto would get that mental information relayed back to him and he would know that technique or have that experience from training. But maybe using shadow clones was a bit too much, especially since it was around the Fumina sisters. They probably wouldn't even notice, but considering how smart they were, Naruto would not be surprised if they had questioned him about his abnormal clones. Still, it was always nice to mess with them. A brief breeze brushed the back of his neck as he stood up. There was about 10 minutes in his break left and he had no way to spend it. He jumped down, descending onto the ground from a random rooftop that he had for some reason decided would be relaxation spot for the day, and while coming down he saw a certain raven-haired boy whom he had come to dislike. Sasuke was running down the road, with almost all his strength, as if he was being pursued by someone. Uchiha Tem, what the hell are you running from? But to Naruto's displeasure the boy just ran past him without so much as a word. Well, that was rude. Naruto looked down. About 3 seconds after Sasuke had passed him, a low vibrating rumble began sound down the street where Sasuke had just come from. On the ground, tiny pebbles danced vigorously from the vibration of the rumble. Naruto looked to his left and his eyes pulled themselves open in pure terror as he realized that he was now looking at a huge cloud of dust being kicked up by an even larger mob of girls. Naruto's stomach sunk at the sight and his face paled. He wasn't looking at girls, no, he was looking at something much more dangerous, fangirls. As they got closer, Naruto could not move, frozen like a block of ice. Then he heard one of them say, "Hey guys, look, we got lucky, look at who is in front of us, we can take him and Sasuke." Naruto's eyes widened when all the girls locked onto him and he glanced to his right and could see Sasuke still running down the street. Oh shit, Naruto said as he realized exactly what was about to occur. He did the only thing that he could do at the time and ran, for his life, taking flight in an attempt to catch up with Sasuke. Naruto, ooh. He grimaced as he heard the mob of love-struck females yell his name just as they were yelling Sasuke's but mere seconds ago. Still Naruto ran, and in about 10 seconds, he caught up with Sasuke, positioning himself right next to the Uchiha. What the hell happened? Naruto asked Sasuke, having to raise his voice over the many loud yells and squeals made by their pursuing fangirls. Nothing, you doby. I was just walking around and they found me. While in his mobile position, Naruto slapped his forehead. You idiot, just walking around. Listen Tem, for future reference, you never ever just walk around when you have fangirls. Next time if you want to just walk around, make sure that you're walking around the rooftops where they can't get you, understood? Naruto scowled when Sasuke just nodded and turned back to the street in front of them. This was most unfortunate, now he was involved. What was supposed to be a simple 15 minutes of tranquility had turned into the most intense and possibly last 15 minutes of his virgin life. Who knew what they would do if they ever caught him or Sasuke, which was highly unlikely. Naruto could have lost the girls on both he and Sasuke's tails, but it was kind of fun seeing the look of pure terror on his face. To think that this was the first time Naruto had ever been chased by his own fangirls. It was fun. He didn't even remember why he had spent his entire academy year cleverly evading them. This was in fact a rush. Naruto looked into the sky once more. The sun had slightly shifted. That gave him about 7 minutes. Sasuke, do you think that you can keep this up for 7 more minutes? He asked in a loud voice. Sasuke merely nodded once more, then swallowed hard. Perhaps he was trying to force down the mass of weakness trying to surface itself in the form of fatigue. In other words, it looked as if Sasuke had been running for quite some time now. But Naruto decided not to ask exactly how long and went back to the task at hand. XXXXXXX. Konoha walked back into class with her head leaning toward the ground. She felt defeated. She and Sanae had wasted so much time trying to look for Naruto and they didn't even find him. Damn, just where the hell is he? She said in a low voice, and she went to take her seat, which was directly behind Naruto's. Who knows, he might be trying to avoid us, he might be running from us. Sanae said, sitting down in her seat with an equally lugubrious expression on her face. Nope, he's running from his fangirls right now. No way. He wouldn't do that, would he? Konoha said, sounding a bit unsure about her words. Both girls let out a sigh. It took some time, but after sighing, they both noticed something. That almost all of the students that had returned early to class were male. Feeling a bit uncomfortable with the lack of female presence, Sanae decided to ask her question into the air. Hey, where are the rest of the girls? There is only 1 minute left in the break. One of the boys in the room answered her back. Who knows, they are probably off chasing their Sasuke-kun somewhere on the premises. He had dark brown eyes with gravity-defying hair that stood up and resembled the outline of a pineapple. And how do you know that Shikamaru? Nara Shikamaru, another class genius. He, along with her, Naruto, and her sister, was one of the smartest kids in the class. However, unlike her, Shikamaru had preferred to do nothing with his amazing brainpower. A lazy genius indeed. Come on, do honestly think that those love-crazed girls have something else better to do in 15 minutes than pursue their dream boy? It did make sense, so she nodded at the lazy boy's answer. Yeah, you're right, I guess it makes sense. A low rumble came from outside the classroom door. Upon hearing this, Sanae knew exactly what was about to happen, which was what happened all the time. Sasuke would come busting in with a mob of girls behind him, and then a huge dispute over who would get to claim the boy would arise, causing a ruckus in the classroom. That's what she expected. However, what she saw was completely different. When the double doors of the class blew open, not only did Sasuke come rushing in, but Naruto flew in as well, and as expected, in came a huge chunk of the female portion of the class behind them. They yelled, they screamed, and they argued not only over Sasuke but Naruto as well. Sanae had never noticed it before, but Naruto also had attracted a lot of female attention, more than she ever bothered to comment on. A tight compact ball formed in Sanae's stomach as she watched her friend get argued over by the many girls. What was this feeling? Jealousy, perhaps? No way. Why would she be jealous if a bunch of girls were to fight over Naruto? She looked over to her sister Konoha and saw that she too watched Naruto as his fangirls groped and tugged at him, her face graced with a mask of intensity. The tight ball loosened a bit in her stomach when she saw Naruto drag himself out of a sea of cheerful fangirls, and she was hit with a warm sensation of relief, mostly because Naruto had come out untouched. But why she was feeling relief at this confused her even more, which added to the already deep pool of unease and potential jealousy that lie deep within her mind. When Naruto flashed her a brilliant smile and wave, Sanae's face lit up like light bulb, but she quickly retreated to her usual expression as she found herself blushing from her reaction to Naruto. Slowly, Sanae looked at Konoha, who had one eyebrow raised with a certain glint in her eye that made her wonder just what it was that was going through her mind. Before she knew it, Naruto had walked up to them and Sanae found herself staring down at the floor. Sanae-chan. Sanae twitched at the mention of the word chan, but continued to stare at the ground, not saying a word. "You okay? You look a bit disturbed," Naruto said, taking his seat next to her, causing the girl to move over just a tad to the right and away from Naruto. The tight ball came back, this time pulling even harder. Every time Sanae thought of something and tried to get it out of her mouth, the ball would end up dragging those words back down into her stomach, leaving her unable to speak. "What's wrong with me? Why am I acting like this? Was it because of what happened?" Her face flushed when she thought of what it was that Naruto's clone had done to her under the tree. "Hey, you okay, Sanae?" "Yeah, she's okay." Konoha had cut in, drawing in Naruto's attention onto herself. "Never mind her though. I want to ask you something. Under the tree during the break, your clone, why was it able to touch Sanae?" Naruto's eyes widened, but he smiled afterwards. I anticipated something like this. If you must know, then I'll tell." He motioned for them both to come closer and leaned in himself. When the three of them were close enough, he began to speak. "He was not just Bunshin. The only reason that he could touch you and you could him was because he was a Kage Bunshin." He said this in a low and barely inaudible whisper. With wide eyes, Sanae and Konoha both retreated with shocked expressions. Konoha was the first to lean back in. "Wait, but that is a Jonin-level technique," she said. "Ah, Konoha-chan, beautiful and intelligent as ever. I'm not surprised that you are aware of the level of that technique. Just wait, let us save this talk for after the exam and then will I tell you everything, the both of you." "Okay." Both girls nodded and Konoha leaned back into her seat to await Iruka and Mizuki's arrival. The entire time Konoha's face was sanguine and heated, most likely from that last comment made by Naruto saying that she was beautiful. The loud arguing and fighting over Sasuke had subsided, leaving everyone to seat themselves and settle down. Naruto cringed as he looked at the aftermath of a person who was once Sasuke. He sat alone and with a blank expression on his face. The face of the violated and touched, an expression ever since he had begun the academy he had grown accustomed to. It seemed as if everyday Sasuke had this expression plastered on his face, all because of the fangirls that attempted to toady him every day. It was not the first time Naruto had seen Sasuke like this after being chased by his fangirls, and he doubted that it would be the last. Then Naruto thought to himself about how different his reaction was compared to Sasuke's. Naruto had avoided his own fangirls up until now, and in his mind, it was not as bad as Sasuke made it seem. The blank and scared expression on the Sasuke's face brought a curl to the young blonde nin's lips. It was always fun to see that Uchiha with that expression on his face. Two loud sounds suddenly filled the room, causing everyone to turn their heads, and standing in front of the two wooden tables holding Hite were the two class instructors Iruka and Mizuki. The two Chunin had their arms folded, with both large smiles and bright eyes. "Okay, listen up, I won't waste any time, so take your seats." The class followed accordingly, which made Iruka nod. "Good, now the rules are simple. All you have to do is come up to either me or Mizuki and do what I have instructed for you to do." Iruka then shifted his gaze onto Mizuki. "Anything else that you would like to add?" Mizuki, a tall man who had silver hair and a jaunty expression on his face, angled his chin up toward the ceiling in a thinking pose. Then brought it back down. "Well, I'll just tell you that we plan to have you come up 2 by 2 in order to quicken the pace. And let's just say that we have a little surprise for you at the end," he said with a smile. Naruto watched Mizuki closely. There was something about the man that Naruto found to be suspicious. He couldn't completely put his finger on it, but there was something about the Chunin that made Naruto think that the man had something to hide. For a long time Naruto watched this man, yet nothing came up to affirm that Mizuki bore ill will toward anyone or anything in this village, so after a while Naruto stopped trying to look beneath the surface and just see Mizuki as an honest school instructor. He tried and failed. Naruto knew that there was something about Mizuki and he would find out, but for no only the exams mattered and not Mizuki's hidden motives. Okay, that's all. Iruka spoke up. Then let's begin. We will call you up in alphabetical order. First up Aburame Shino. Then Mizuki spoke. Second to go, Akamichi Choji, come to my table and get this exam over with. Therefore, it began. Both Iruka and Mizuki began calling students up 2 by 2. Naruto knew that having the last name Uzumaki meant that he would be one of the last ones to be called, but it didn't matter. It was fun to watch some of the pathetic excuses for Bunshin and Henge that some of the class produced. As expected, when Kono and Sanae were called, they performed well above Iruka and Mizuki's expectations, each of them making not 3 but 10 stable Bunshin appear and then going on to produce 2 perfect copies of Iruka and Mizuki. And although Naruto felt that their display of skill was a bit ostentatious, he still prided himself with the fact that like him those two were true geniuses. It took little over 20 minutes to get to the last 2 people, him and Sasuke. Uchiha Sasuke. Mizuki said. Uzumaki Naruto. Iruka said. Both boys stood up, walking to the front of the room with the rest of the class to their backs. Standing almost shoulder to shoulder, they both looked at each other, and when Naruto locked-eyed with Sasuke, he no longer saw the blank languid eyes of one who had just been violated. Instead he saw the eyes of an Uchiha trying to prove himself. That was good. That's what Naruto wanted to see. Fire. However, it was a shame that it had to be Naruto who doused the flames burning within Sasuke. Well, actually it wasn't all that bad at all. Naruto, you both know the drill. Iruka said. Naruto and Sasuke nodded and they both made a hand seal. In unison, the two cried out. Bunshin no Jutsu. A dim haze of chakra surrounded the both of them and it flickered about. In less than 3 seconds the class was staring at 20 Narutos and Sasukes combined. The rest of the kids all gasped in awe at the amount of ease at which both boys produced the technique. Iruka and Mizuki, however, stayed silent. A slight angle bent the sides of Iruka's mouth. That was good. A bit pretentious, but good. On to the next portion. Make a henge of me and Mizuki. Naruto mentally sighed. This exam was almost getting too easy. He glanced once more at Sasuke before dispelling his clones. Sasuke himself did the same. Again they both made a single hand seal, and in unison they said. Henge no Jutsu. There was a generation of smoke, and before they knew it, Iruka and Mizuki were seeing double as they both gazed into their own eyes. Both instructors took a step back out of shock. Wow, Naruto. Sasuke, you pass. Iruka said. Right, you have. Go on and claim you headbands, the both of you. Mizuki added in. With the said, Naruto and Sasuke both walked up too, claimed their hiteites from the wooden table, and went to take their seats. When he sat down, Naruto felt someone tap him and he turned only to come face to face with a smiling Kono who gave him a thumb up, simply chuckled and turned back to Iruka and Mizuki, but not before giving Sasuke a quick glance. Good, Iruka said while clapping his hands. The sound was intensified by the walls of the classroom. Now that the advancement exam is over, we can move on to the next and final portion of the day. He swayed his arm over to Mizuki, who then took over the reins. Now, Mizuki began. If you all remember, I said that there was a little surprise at the end for you all. Well, get ready, because an awkward silence settled in the room. Most of the kids were literally on the edge of their seats. Today is your last day here as students, and tomorrow you all will be assigned new sensei. This comment drew a rather unexpected reaction from the class. Silence. Nothing but silence could be heard as the students now turned Jen and said nothing. It was a delayed reaction, but Iruka for some reason felt a pang of relief when he heard almost all of his students yell out, "What?" He was expecting that reaction. I know. Since you are all now genin, you no longer need to stay here and learn about the basics, because, well, you already know them. Meet here tomorrow in the morning and then you will all be assigned to you new Jonin-sensei. You are all dismissed. Naruto, along with everyone else, stood up and left, leaving their former Chunin-sensei to talk among themselves. XXXXXX. It could be said that at this very moment Naruto was upbeat. He was now a genin, but unfortunately, he knew what being a genin would mean. It would mean that he would now be pressured even more than he already was to become an Anbu member. As Naruto walked down the streets to his destination, which was the Hokage Tower, he ignored the stares and glare coming from the many merchants and street vendors who were aware of his condition. Not even they could penetrate the solid wall of concentration that he had set up in his mind. All he could focus on right now was what exactly he was going to say to Oji-san once he got there. He was fully aware that the Sandaime greatly wished for him to join the Anbu, and that he being an official genin now meant that he was now of official ninja rank. And according to the rule of Anbu admission, any ninja of any rank was eligible to become an Anbu. The whole idea of Jonin only being able to become Anbu was just a lie. That false dogma had only risen because getting into the Anbu was so freaking hard that usually only Jonin tried. Knowing this, Naruto grimaced heavily, not wanting to think about the most likely uncomfortable conversation that the two would most likely have. At times like this, Naruto had actually wished that Sanae or even Konoha were here to bug him and keep his mind off of the awkward topic that kept poking him in the back of his head. XXXXXX, Hokage's office. As sighed heavily as he entered his surrogate grandfather's office. The old man looked up from behind a small mountain of papers and smiled. Ah, Naruto-kun, you have returned. I assume that the advancement exam was today. Did you pass? Naruto raised an eyebrow before he pulled up a seat from the corner of the room and sat down in front of the Hokage. He crossed his arms. What do you mean you assume? You're the Hokage, for Pete's sake, Oji-san. You don't assume stuff like this, you already know it. And come now, do you really think that I could ever fail a test that easy? That's an insult to me. That test was way below my level. I only jest, Naruto-kun, I'm well aware of your ability. He said with a slight chuckle. Yeah, I know, but it's always fun to play along. Naruto said, responding with a bright smile. There was a brief pause and the both of them then burst out in a unified bit of laughter. It was always fun to share a laugh with Oji-san every now and then. Not many people could say that they hung out with the Hokage of the village. It was just one of the many perquisites that came with being who he was. Maybe the Sandaime was one of the reasons why Naruto had decided to stay in this village. Sarutobi's face then suddenly shifted to an expression of seriousness. Upon seeing this, Naruto quickly mimicked his action. The old man then arched his back forward, while placing his elbows his desk and resting his head on the backside of his palms. Naruto always found it surprising at how Oji-san could switch between moods so easily. Naruto-kun, now I'm sure you already know what I'm about to say. Naruto mentally sighed, throwing his gaze down at the floor. Yes, I know, he responded quietly. Naruto then looked back up at Sarutobi. But, is it really a matter so important that it should be pressed onto me like this? Sarutobi sighed. Naruto-kun, you know that I only want the best for you and I want to see you succeed. This chance could release you from the life you are living now. But if you feel as though you should not accept this issue that I've presented to you before, then, by all means I will not stop you. Let it be as you say, Naruto-kun. Now Naruto was put out of his comfort zone, Whenever Oji-san wanted him to do something, he would always ask Naruto in ways that he considered being sly and cunning. It greatly disturbed him at how adept the old man was at appealing to his conscience, but what more could you expect from the village Hokage? As kind and gentle as he was also manipulative and clever. Naruto swallowed down the lump beginning to form at the base of his throat. "Do you really want me to join the Anbu that badly?" Naruto asked. "Indeed I do, Naruto-kun. That offer I made you last year on your first day at the academy, I did not make it because I thought you would prove to be a great contribution to the Anbu Black Ops, but because I knew you would. But like I said before, it is up to you." Again with that cleverness of his. Naruto looked Sarutobi dead in the eye. It was always like this. They would have a serious conversation and Sarutobi would ask something of Naruto. And as much as he did want to, Naruto was always the one who ended up caving in first. It was something he hated about being under the wise stare of the Hokage, and he berated himself for it. Sarutobi cleared his throat just a bit too loudly, letting Naruto know that he was getting impatient with the boys stalling. The pressure began to build and Naruto feared that history would repeat itself and that he would end up saying something that he really didn't want to. "I'll join," Naruto said in one sudden voice. He mentally cursed himself for being so weak, but he would not give in without leaving behind his mark. But, Naruto said, continuing on in a smooth and restricted voice. "I will only join if I am allowed to do one thing." Sarutobi smiled. Knowing that he had already won the battle, nothing Naruto could say would be enough to get this smile off of his face. "What is it?" he said, sounding slightly content with the world, his smile still beamed, like a white arch of light. "Give me permission to show my true ability from now on." Sarutobi's eyes widened and the smile faded, and along with it the arch of light returned to nothing. He was wrong. There was something that Naruto could say. "What? Naruto-kun, are you insane? Are you aware of the social implications that doing something like that would bring you?" "Yes, I am. However, if you decline and do not allow me to do as I please, then the Anbu will be nothing but a thing of the past." The creases on Sarutobi's forehead resurfaced as he was suddenly caught in a deep train of thought. Perhaps I have taught him too well. He fooled me into fulfilling his wish in return for him fulfilling my wish. Clever. Does he even know the reason why I set the law that forbids citizens and shinobi alike from uttering a word about the Kyuubi? If I allow him to show his power, then it can only lead to one of two things. Either people recognize him for his strength, or they do the exact opposite and shun him out of fear of a growing influence made by Kyuubi. But this is what he wants. "Naruto, I'm swimming out into dangerous waters by allowing you to do this, but..." Sarutobi looked up at Naruto, and smiled. "Okay Naruto-kun, you win. If you join the Anbu, you will be allowed to display your power to the public. But rest assured you will have plenty of time to show what you are made out of, for as you know the entire process of applying someone as an Anbu member will take an immense amount of time. Most likely up to a year's time. I wanted you to take the offer last year so that by tomorrow you would have been able to start your duty as an active Anbu member. Unfortunately, you declined. Feel secure because you now have a year's time to wait until you become Anbu. So enjoy it." Naruto nodded happily as he quickly stood up, and upon looking at the boy's optimistic demeanor, Sarutobi grumbled. He really had taught Naruto too well. The boy was already intelligent enough as he was. Add the logic of a Hokage and you've got a problem on your hands. "Thank you, Oji-san. I greatly appreciate it," Naruto said as he got up, a small curl bending the sides of his lips. "I'll report to you after I meet my Jonin tomorrow, but I'm guessing that you already know who that person is." He left with a curt bow and walked outside of the office. A smile on his face, knowing that he had finally been allowed to show his ability as he pleased in the village without consequence. He would no longer have to keep up the facade of the Kyuubi boy with average skills. he would now be known as the genius boy with the Kyuubi sealed inside of him. It was a future that he greatly looked forward to, and the thought of such a future carried him in good spirit all the way to his small apartment, where he stopped at the door. "Tomorrow is a new day," he said while making a reach for the knob and opened his door. He turned back and glanced at the sky. The ominous twilight looked different today. The skyline was a shining bright red, as if Kami's hand had just swept over it with a fresh coat of paint. Who knew? Maybe in the morning the paint would dry and the skyline's color would deepen, so that when he woke up the next morning he would be able to gaze upon his very own crimson dawn. Once again Naruto began his day on his rooftop, just like the one before. He stood, pajamas and all, basking in the warm light of the sun. As of now his gaze was centered at the sky. Based off what he had seen yesterday, he was wrong. The sky hadn't deepened into crimson, it just looked normal. Not that normal wasn't good and all, it just meant that the day would be boring to say the least. He first noticed it when he felt the lack of commotion. There was nobody here who wanted to kill him today. It was strange, but Naruto always looked forward to seeing the unconscious faces of those random nin who always tried to exterminate him, and the lack of their presence made him feel uneasy. He lowered his gaze down onto the great stone face that he had come to admire so much. As usual they held that same rugged brilliance that made them shine with artificial luster. Maybe the day wouldn't be as boring as he had thought it would be. His eyes then settled onto the stone Hokage face that was set all the way onto the fat right. The man with spiky wild hair, the fourth Hokage. Naruto then brought his hand and ran it through his own unruly golden locks. His eyes never left the fourth's face. It was just too much of a coincidence that he resembled the fourth. It often bothered him how much they bore a resemblance to each other. "Who are you?" Naruto uttered in a low tone before letting his hand fall back to his side. The wind then kicked up as it usually did every morning. Naruto savored the crisp feel of the wind caressing his body. He especially enjoyed the breeze between his knees that came with the light breeze. The Yondaime was the one who sealed the Kyuubi into him. Strangely, he was perfectly fine with that. The only thing that bugged him was why he chose him out of all people. What could have driven the man to think that Uzumaki Naruto would be a good jail for the fox, despite the fact that Naruto actually was a good jail for the fox? It was a bit too much to think about, and one of the very few things that Naruto found complicated, so he decided to drop it for the moment and just get back to his monument gazing. But for some reason Naruto kept getting the feeling that someone was behind him, watching and waiting carefully, a silent predator waiting to kill its prey. However, Naruto would never allow himself to be called prey. He would not become some lurking wolf's breakfast. He first let out a sigh, then, "Hey, how long do you plan to just standing there and doing nothing?" At first was no response. For a second it seemed as if Naruto was talking to himself. But a millisecond before Naruto opened his mouth to follow up on his question, he heard a low chuckle followed by the sound of clapping. His eyebrow rose into the shape of a boomerang as he heard the muffled voice the potential assailant. Impressive. You're only a genin and you sensed me so quickly. You know there are a lot of jonin who wouldn't be able to sense me standing directly behind them like you did, nor would they be able to sense anyone else in my faction for that matter." "And what would that faction be?" Naruto asked with interest. He didn't bother to turn, for he already knew the answer. "Why, the Anbu Black Ops, of course. It took you only 4 seconds for you to notice my presence. Given that time at your age, I'd say that you're the real deal." Naruto made a quick turn around and faced the man behind him. The first thing he noticed was that the man was considerably taller than he was, forcing him to look up. The second thing that he noticed was that this man was in fact an Anbu member, mask and all, and that he was wearing a wicked tiger mask. He labeled this man as the Anbu captain he had seen in Oji-san's office last year. Although he couldn't fully tell, but Naruto kept getting the feeling that the Anbu captain was smiling behind his animistic disguise. Well, now that we've established that I'm Uzumaki Naruto, care to tell the reason for your arrival? Ah, cutting right to the chase, I see. Well, if you must know, I'm here to deliver to you a message. From, Naruto said, crossing his arms. From the third, seeing as how you will be joining the Anbu next year, our Hokage thought that it was a good idea to train with the Anbu from now on. With that being the case, I made a recommendation for you to join my team. I've seen the results of your work. That Jonin you brought us yesterday was proof of your skill. That was only a result of your power, but I want to witness it in action, with my own eyes. Therefore, he paused for a moment and reached into one of his side pockets and pulled out a small black scroll. I want to give you this. He held the scroll out for Naruto to take, which he did. The boy then tore the paper seal and opened it horizontally. As expected, the surface of the paper was riddled with what looked like directions to some unknown area. The myriad of text and apparent longers bored Naruto out of his mind by him just looking at the scroll. Directions? He asked. To where? The captain chuckled once more. To the Anbu training ground, of course. By the end of the day I want you to head to that location to meet me and the rest of my team. Naruto's eyes widened a bit. The rest of your team? Well, if you're going to be part of this team, then don't you think that it's a good idea to meet everyone? Well, not necessarily, I mean. Naruto was cut off when the tiger-masked Anbu waved his hand in the air. Please don't answer that, he said with a light laugh. It was surprising to Naruto how much emotion this Anbu member was actually showing. A normal Anbu wouldn't show anything and just remain stoic and emotionless as expected by Anbu protocol. This guy must have been one of the stronger ones. There was something that intrigued Naruto about this man. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew that the man was strong. He would obviously make for an efficient teammate. It would be unwise for him not to take him up on his training offer. Okay, I won't answer that, he said as he looked scroll up and down. Training with the Anbu. No offense, but considering that I have trained with the Hokage for 6 years, wouldn't that be a step down in my training? None taken. I understand your concerns perfectly, however do not worry. We may not be as strong as the Hokage himself, but we are close. I think that we will be enough to keep you on your toes. The captain said, brushing off his shoulder. Fair enough. Then it's set. After I meet with my Jonin, I'll meet with you afterwards. The tiger-faced mask dipped as the taller man gave Naruto a curt bow. Thank you. I hope you don't disappoint us, he said upon rising. I won't. Oh, and by the way, what's your name? Yuji Saito. Naruto then nodded and turned away with a satisfied sigh escaping his lungs. He glanced back and there was nobody standing where Saito just was. Damn it, how did they do that? He said as he rolled the scroll back up and began walking back into his little apartment. He also made it a mental note to ask Saito exactly how Anbu just disappeared like that when he got to their first training session. But for now he figured that getting ready for his normal life as a genin would suffice. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto sniffed in a noseful of fresh air as he stepped up to the front gate of the Fumina compound. Although they weren't that powerful a clan as the Hyugas or Uchihas, the Fuminas still had a family compound that was massive, even when compared to that of the other more powerful clans. The brilliantly polished front gate towered over Naruto's short stature, lustrous mahogany gleaming from the sun's light. Naruto paused for a moment, to admire the wood. Its sheen almost made the wood look as if its surface was wet. Geez, the Fuminas must be one insanely smart clan to be able to live in a place like this. Their door just screams rich. Naruto brought his hand up to the dark wood and knocked 3 times, loudly. There was no response at first, which made Naruto contemplate on whether or no he should knock again, but when he heard footsteps approaching he abandoned those thoughts. The double doors cracked open, then fully swung open, revealing the lush green expanse that was the Fumina courtyard. While the place really was huge, he never ceased to be amazed every time he saw. Inside were a myriad of individual houses and homes, most of which had 2 or more floors. The inside of the manor was so large that there were even small individual roads run through the entire place. Naruto had seen this so many times before, but damn, it never stopped amazing him. Naruto was pulled out of his trance of adulation when he noticed 2 slender women walk into view from behind the 2 massive doors. Both of them beautiful, red-haired and wearing 2 matching blue kimonos with black stripes. The watery color of their kimonos stick out in contrast to their bright red hair. It was almost comical how their heads stuck out so much. Naruto soon found himself wondering why they chose to wear such colors. They both stopped in front of him, putting on 2 bright smiles. "Ah, Naruto-san, how are you today?" they both said in perfect sync. It didn't surprise Naruto that they spoke simultaneously, considering that these women were twins. However, what did surprise Naruto was the amount of irony that went with the situation. "Ah, I'm fine, Chigusa, Nagisa, and how are you doing today?" "Fine," they both replied cheerfully. "Sanae-chan and Kono-chan will be with you shortly. Why don't you come in and wait for them?" Naruto nodded and walked past the 2 redheads, who closed the doors behind him. In his mind he couldn't help but think that they were just naturally nice people. Whether or not they knew of his status as Kyuubi's jail, he did not know. However, if they did know, then they surely didn't let it show, for they actually showed him kindness and compassion. Not what he was used to. "You can sit over there and we'll go fetch them," they said in unison, pointing to a bench near a miniature garden on a strip of grass. Naruto smiled and nodded. He then made his way over to the bench and took a seat. By the time he had sat down, the 2 twins were gone, in search of Kono and Sanae, leaving him to sit by himself. Naruto leaned his head back against the bench, so that his eyes were angled toward the sky. For several minutes he sat there staring at the vast blue sea of air, his mind wandering to and fro on random subjects until it was brought back onto the subject of Nagisa and Chigusa and how they somehow spoke in unison seemingly all the time. He had heard of twin telepathy, but until now he hadn't believed that it existed. How did they do that? He whispered to himself, just when a gentle breeze rolled in and he began to enjoy his moment of solitude. "How does who do what?" asked an unquestionably female voice. Right after he heard the voice, a pretty brunette woman walked into his view. Because of the way his head was positioned, it looked to Naruto as if this lady's body was upside down. "Ah, hello Fumina-san. I was just wondering how your 2 gatekeepers, Nagisa and Chigusa, have such syncopated speech." Naruto leaned forward so that he was in an upright position and turned so that his full view was on the woman in front of him. He noticed that the lady was wearing a decorative black and white kimono with a red sash. She had long jet black hair and blue eyes, just like her daughter Sanae. This was in fact Sanae and Kono's mother, Mei Fumina. She was a nice woman whom Naruto had grown to become very fond of, and not just because of her ample bosom. "Oh, those 2 always do that. I'm still trying to figure out how they do it. Maybe if I was a redhead like they are, they would tell me, don't you think?" she said with a warm smile, which Naruto returned with one of his own. Well, maybe being a redhead might have solved it, but unfortunately Mei wasn't born a natural redhead, unlike all the other Fuminas were, with the exception of her 2 daughters. The reason for her dark hair was that she was not actually a blood-related Fumina, she just became one when she married into the clan. That being the situation, most people outside of the clan who did not know that Mei wasn't a real Fumina would always deem her as an anomaly inside the clan for not possessing the bright red hair that had come to be recognized as the Fumina trademark. It was a color that was passed down from generation to generation, similar to the Haruno clan, which was known for having unnaturally pink hair. Even in their men, Are Sanae and Kono ready yet? Naruto suddenly asked. Mei then crossed her arms, pushing up her large assets which no doubt drew Naruto's attention to them. Luckily she hadn't noticed. Yes, when I left the main compound they were already dressed, they should be here shortly. But until they come, can I ask why you are in such a hurry? Well, today is the day that we all get to meet our Jonin senseis and I was a bit excited to meet them. Naruto replied. Oh, yes, how could I have forgotten? You know, a sly look suddenly slid onto her face and she leaned in, accidentally giving Naruto a better view of her chest. Sanae and Kono came home really excited yesterday. They kept talking about who their new sensei would be. And since they already know, they were wondering who would be on their genin teams and I couldn't help but overhear them both mention that they really wanted you to be with them. Naruto, with his head inched away, fought down the urge to blush. Man, if this was what Kono and Sanae would look like in the future then he would have no problem being on their teams as genin. He had always thought that Kono and Sanae's mother was a bit too friendly with him. What was she trying to doing? Hook him up with one of her daughters? Well, obviously, but Naruto still played along. Really? They said they wanted me on their team, I couldn't imagine why. He said smoothly with outright fake innocence. Mei laughed aloud. Oh, I think you know, Naruto-kun. I think you know exactly why they said it. You can't fool me with that baby face act. Remember, I'm a Fumina. She then tapped her head. I can see right through that. His eyes narrowed. I know why and you know as well, but just for kicks why don't you just tell me why you think they said that? Well, we are good friends and all, he replied. Maybe playing along with a Fumina wasn't a very bright idea. She may not have been a blood Fumina, but damn, she was just as smart. Although he was pretty sure that his response was sufficient enough to get her to drop the topic. True, but I didn't hear them speak about any of their other friends. The entire night it was just about you. Naruto-kun this and Naruto-kun that. Naruto's head flicked up when he heard that Kono and Sanae had actually called him Naruto-kun. He always thought that they hated addressing people with such friendly endings, well, Sanae at least. Naruto's open action didn't go on unnoticed by Mei, for she then brought her face closer to his. He stayed silent. Oh, did I say something that interests you? Naruto. Damn it, she is good, well then I guess that all. He was about to open his mouth when he heard 4 sets of footsteps. Okasan, stop harassing him, that's really rude, you know, said Kono's voice from behind him. He turned to see her and Sanae walking up behind. Following right behind them were the 2 gatekeepers Nagisa and Chigusa. Naruto mentally sighed. He was safe, but he knew that if he stayed any longer Mei would ferret out what he was about to say before. Okay, now that we are all here, he looked at Sanae and Kono, we can all get to the academy now, right? Right, okay, so we'll be going now, he said as he grabbed both Sanae and Kono by the shoulder and dashed off with them into the distance and out through the Fumina compound main gate. Mei then giggled and glanced at Nagisa and Chigusa. Ah, young love, funny isn't it? She said, to which the 2 twins responded with 2 syncopated giggles of their own. Mei then bowed to the 2 twins and bid them a good day. It was funny. Upon leaving the manor, Naruto had kicked up a rather large cloud of dust. Since when was the boy that fast? XXXXXXXX. After a minute of running, Naruto had finally slowed and allowed Sanae and Kono to gain possession over their own arms once more. The looks on both their faces were confused, unwitting and most of all, exactly the same. They had turned onto the street that was home to the famous Ichiraku ramen shop, the Ichiraku district. Because of the ramen bar's popularity, this long street had adopted the name of its most well-known attraction. It was a good thing too. This district was one that was just a straight path to their academy, merely a long line of shops going in 1 or 2 general directions. This was the street that the trio had always taken to the academy, just as they were now. But there was something weird about today's walk to the academy, something odd about Naruto. Sanae and Kono didn't let this go on unaddressed. "Hey Naruto, you okay?" Sanae asked the blonde. Naruto slipped his hands into his pockets and straightened out his back, his quote, "cool guy walk." "Of course, I'm doing just fine, I'm just a little tetchy. I'm itching to find out who my new Jonin is." Sanae just nodded and looked back in front of her. For some reason she helped but think that there was something different about Naruto this day. His entire aura seemed different, like he had suddenly gotten a hell of a lot stronger in a way. She cast a glance toward her sister who didn't miss a beat and nodded. Either Naruto had changed or their mother had said something really unusual to him, and knowing their mom, it was most likely the latter. They would both find out. "Hey Naruto, what exactly were you and our mother talking about?" Kono asked suspiciously. Naruto just chuckled, still keeping his cool stride that made him look as if he was gliding. "Oh, nothing important. I just asked her how your two twin gatekeepers speak like that," he responded. "Oh, you mean Nagisa and Chigusa? Yeah, we've been trying to figure that out for the better part of our lives as well," Sanae said with a small giggle. It seemed as if he had thrown them off of the topic of their mother for the time being. However, he mentally sighed when Kono again asked another question. "Are you sure that's what you two were talking about? Because to me it looked she was talking about something a bit more personal," Kono said, narrowing her eyes. She knew that he was hiding something and she was determined to find out what it was. "Well, it doesn't matter if I tell them," Naruto thought to himself. He should have guessed that one of them would try and impugn what it was he was saying, so to save time and to save himself from suffering the torment of any future diatribes he decided that he would tell her. But if she got mad, it wasn't his fault. "Well, if you insist, then I guess that I'll tell you." Then a certain aroma wafted into the air, tickling Naruto's nose. He sniffed a couple of times into the air. Ramen. He then heard the low growl of someone's stomach and his head flicked toward Kono, who had a slight blush on her face. "Hey, Gomen, I was so pumped about today that I forgot to eat breakfast," she said with one hand on the back of her head and the other rubbing her stomach in a circular motion. Sanae let out a slight giggle at how careless her sister could sometimes be. Her nose then picked up the sweet aroma in the air as well, and she let out a soft sigh at the smell of sweet ramen. Sometimes the Ichiraku district could take someone's stomach for the wildest of rides. The pleasant fragrances were something that she could always expect to meet whenever she walked through here. However, Sanae wasn't expecting what happened next. In a wild turn of events, her stomach let out a low raspy growl of hunger as well, a really loud one too. It was as if there was some huge hulking beast residing within her abdomen waiting to satisfy its anger. Her face flushed and she let out a loud giggle, attracting a bit of unwanted attention from the villagers. "Haha. Well, I guess that I'm a little hungry. I almost forgot that I didn't have breakfast either," she said defensively. "Well, it's obvious that you two both didn't have any breakfast, and by the sounds of it you're both extremely hungry. I think the best thing for both of you would be some breakfast at Ichiraku's. I mean, while in Ramen District you might as well have something to fill you up," Naruto suggested while they walked, which both girls agreed to with a unified nod. The two Fuminas then stopped and allowed their noses to point them in the general direction of the Ichiraku ramen bar. As they turned and began to walk the other way, they stopped and turned back to Naruto. "You're not coming," Kono said. Naruto just shook his head and kept on walking. He threw his hand up and yelled back at them. "No way. I've got other things to do besides watch you two eat. I'll see you at the academy." He then continued down the street, leaving the two sisters to stand in each other's company. On the walk to Ichiraku's, the two sisters mostly stayed silent. They were thinking the same thing. However, neither would come out and say anything. They let their thoughts swim around in their heads all the way to the ramen bar where they sat down next to each other. You know he's hiding something, right? Kono said to her sister, who nodded. Due to their proximity of the food, the smell of ramen had grown stronger, causing Kono to lean on the counter, allowing her nose to be pleased by the captivating noodles. Yeah, I know, and it's probably something that our mother said to him. I just hope that what she said didn't have anything to do with us. Sanae replied. She then flicked some of her hair back behind her shoulder. Don't worry, we'll find out before today is over. All we have to do is find a way to annoy him long enough to get him to tell us. Ah, hello, if it isn't the Fumina sisters, and what will we be having? Said a gruff voice that caused both sisters to look in front of them. Standing there was the old man that owned the place, Ichiraku Tsuki. He and Naruto were on very good terms due to the blonde's loves of ramen, and because of their affiliation with Naruto, Sanae and Kono were liked by the old man as well. Seeing as how it was a bit too early for ramen, Kono decided that something simple would do. I'll have steamed rice and miso soup with grilled fish and some seasoned nori. The elderly shop owner nodded with a smile and yelled back to order to his daughter Ayame, who replied with a yell of equal volume. Tsuki then turned to Sanae. What about you, Sanae-san? What will you order be? He said. Sanae then contemplated on whether or not she should go for something overly extravagant, but then remembered that this place was a ramen bar. Their specialty, most likely, wasn't breakfast. That being the case, she decided to match the simplicity of her sister's order and order something plebeian. I'd like some tamagoyaki with a side of miso soup as well, and some pickled daikon to go with it. Your orders will be ready soon, Tsuki said while going into the back to help his daughter prepare the food for the two sisters. Kono then watched the man until he was out of sight, and once he was, she turned to her sister again. Today, we'll find out what he's hiding, she said, to which Sanae agreed. Yeah, Sanae was cut off in mid-sentence by another low growl coming from her stomach. She gave a slight blush. Yeah, we'll get him after breakfast, Sanae said in a slightly embarrassed tone. Agreed, Kono said. XXXXXX, back with Naruto. Naruto had guessed that this was a good place to stop before he went to class. After all, if he was going to show off his power today, then this place would be essential. After he had separated from Sanae and Kono, instead of going straight to class, he drifted off to another part of the village. He found himself in an empty street that was lined with dozens of stores and weapon shops. This was one of the more unknown streets in the village, the one that nobody lived on. Naruto continued to walk down the desolate road until a certain shop caught his eye and he stopped. Primarily, the reason why no people lived here was mainly because this part of the village was in proximity to the Forest of Death. It was literally on the edge of Konoha. The villagers were too scared to live here. The rumors surrounding the forest certainly spread fast around the village, and because of that, this place was like a barren wasteland. But just because it wasn't occupied didn't mean that the stores got no business. In fact, out of all the shops in Konoha, these shops got the most business. There was only one reason for this district's financial success, and that reason was because this avenue was the district where the most of the highest-ranked ninja in the village shopped. This avenue was in fact the Anbu district. This was the place where mostly only Anbu and a few select jonin lived and shopped for weapons and supplies. Because it was on the outer edges, it was ideal for the Anbu members who were constantly patrolling the perimeter of the village. Surely this wasn't the type of place genin would be caught dead in. Good thing Naruto was no regular genin. After his brief pause in front of the store, he read the name on the dusty wall above the entrance to the shop. His lips then silently mouthed out the words, "Gekani Clothing Shop." His eyebrow curled. What a mysterious name, he said aloud. However, despite its name, he still just shrugged it off and walked inside. Hey, excuse me, But he stopped when he stepped inside. You could have said that he was overtaken by all the extravagant merchandise in the shop, however that wasn't the case. He was stopped by one thing and one thing only. the numerous glares that were aimed at him the instant he walked inside. Inside were numerous ninja, all of which were made up of Anbu and high-ranking jonin, most of which were either staring at him or off observing some sturdy piece of clothing. Despite the people in the way, Naruto had noticed that the shop was rather spacious, although one could not tell when looking from the outside. Naruto looked around left and right until he finally spotted and walked up to the cashier's counter. The cashier himself was a large burly bald man wearing a stained brown tank top. He couldn't see his pants for they were hidden behind the long wooden counter. What he could see though was the man's upper lip curling with was most likely disgust. His small beady brown eyes were aimed directly at Naruto's own blue eyes. By the way he folded his heavily muscled arms and stuck out his rather large belly, Naruto took it as an attempt to intimidate him. "Hey, kid, just what the hell are you doing here?" he asked in a demanding tone. Although Naruto thought that his ostentatiously loud voice was a bit annoying, he decided to answer him back. "Is it not obvious, Baka? I'm here to buy me something new to wear." Upon being called an idiot, a wide vein popped up on the burnished head of who Naruto thought was the shop owner. Naruto smiled inwardly. If he had drawn such a reaction from this man, then it wouldn't be hard to get what he wanted without a fight. Well, maybe not. The large man slammed his hand on the top of the counter. "Hey, listen here, runt. I'm not in the mood right now to play games. What's a genin like you doing here in this part of the village? You shouldn't even possess the whereabouts of this place." Naruto noticed that where the man's hand had struck the wooden counter, the wood itself was horribly cracked. Naruto was neither stupid nor unobservant, and because of that Naruto could tell right away that this man was no shinobi, however he was outrageously strong. "Well, I'm here and I possess the whereabouts of this shop, so therefore it should be obvious that I am no normal genin, Baka." Naruto's voice carried a bit of hostility which further pissed the large man off. Strangely, none of the other jonin and Anbu seemed to care about what was occurring at the counter. Did this happen a lot? Because it sure seemed like it. No matter though, if a fight were to spark up, Naruto knew that he would be able to take this guy, plus this was the best place possible to display his power. What better place to show off what he could do than a place where all the strongest nin gathered? Plus I have this. Naruto then pulled out the black scroll that Saito had given him. "I got the directions from this thing here." The man's eyes widened. It turned out that the scroll that Saito had given him was actually a map of Konoha, and not just any map. It was a map from an Anbu's vantage point. Therefore it showed you the location of many of the shops and hidden training grounds used by Anbu in the village. "Okay, short stuff. Say what you have to say before I lose my cool," he said. Unfortunately for Naruto, his height was always a topic of ridicule, and what exacerbated the current situation was that his head was barely a mere foot above the unnecessarily high counter. That being the case, only Naruto's neck could be seen. "By all means, big man, lose your cool, I've got time. Listen here, I haven't killed you yet only because you're a child, but if you don't show some respect then I'll just have to make you. Besides, what makes you think that I'll give you of all people my service?" That comment caused Naruto to raise a brow. "What do you mean, me of all people?" Naruto asked. "Oh, that's right, you don't know. I would tell you, but I'm afraid I'd get killed if I did," he said with a smile on his face. "Oh, that's what you mean, man, that's old news. See, but the thing is, you can't speak of it, but I can, and trust me, I know what's in me. I am very much aware." That comment drew the attention of the many Anbu occupying the shop. "Now I have a special order to place in for you. I want something better fitting than this old jumpsuit here, take it or else." Naruto spat his last words out with a bit of venom, and judging by the man's personality this should have been enough to lure him into a fight. "You little runt, I'll kill you," he yelled out. "Just come and try," Naruto said with a smirk. The man hopped onto the counter, producing a loud thud. Now that his lower body was within full view, His brown pants could be seen in all their dusty glory as he prepared to launch himself at Naruto. Ah, finally a chance to show his power in front of some ninja who actually mattered in the village. As Naruto readied himself and tightened his fist, he heard a voice. "Yuru, stop this at once." The voice cut through the air like a kunai, completely drawing the attention of everyone in the store. The air was heavy and everything was silent. Damn it, now who the hell would try to stop me from kicking this guy's? Naruto thought to himself, already annoyed. He noticed that the large man had a scared expression on his face. He looked past him and saw a tall and slender brown-eyed elderly man with long gray hair that hung to his back. He was wearing a purple shirt which was tucked into a black hakama. "Yuru, attacking customers is unacceptable, and you know it. Now get back behind the counter and let me handle things here." "Sorry boss, it won't happen again," Yuru stammered out. He then slipped down behind the counter and glared at Naruto, who reciprocated his glare with a glare of his own. However, his focus was broken when he heard that old man's voice one more. "I must apologize on Yuru's behalf, he gets like that from time to time," he said while giving him a courteous bow. Naruto saw that Yuru himself was having a tough time trying to hold back his anger and chuckled. "No need to apologize. After all, I was part of reason for the fight almost occurring," Naruto responded. "Still, it is my obligation as this store owner to take responsibility for employees." Naruto's eyes widened a bit. "Oh, so you're the store owner. I knew it was too nice to be run by a guy like him," Naruto said while pointing a thumb at Yuru, who just growled at the boy. The old man then chuckled at Yuru's reaction. "Yes, that is correct, I am the owner. My name is Konoha Gekani." Note that all names are backwards, so his first name is Gekani. "Uzumaki Naruto. Pleased to meet you," Naruto said, but then noticed Gekani looking him up and down. "Is there a problem?" Naruto asked. "No, I was just wondering how a genin found out about this place, that's all," he said. "Trust me, I'm stronger than I look," Naruto replied. "But cutting to the chase, I need to make a special order for a custom piece of clothing." When Gekani motioned for him to follow, Naruto complied and allowed himself to be allowed into a room in the back of the store, but not before giving Yuru the finger. The large man then gritted his teeth as he watched the boy fade away into the back room. "Oh, I am so going to hurt that little runt," he said. "I wouldn't try anything," said a voice right next to him. Yuru turned to see an Anbu with a modified tiger mask. He jumped back a little out of surprise. How long were you standing there?" Yuru asked, slightly afraid. "That doesn't matter, but anyway, I just wanted to tell you not to try anything with that kid. He's more powerful than you can imagine, and by the looks of it he'll get stronger. So you better show him some respect because he's going to be coming here a lot more, that's for sure. And don't think that you can surprise him either. Any plans that you have right now for fighting him should be abandoned, for your sake anyway." Yuru then looked at door where Naruto had walked through with Gekani. "He doesn't seem that strong," he said, but when he got no answer he turned his head and saw nobody there. He hated it when Anbu members did that to him. Meanwhile with Naruto, he was lead into room full of different fabrics and material. "So what would this custom order be, Uzumaki-san?" he said with a smile. That was something he wasn't used to, a smile. Most people who knew who he was either frowned or glared at him, much like Yuru had. It made Naruto wonder whether or not Gekani was aware of his status, but judging by the man's elderly appearance, it was obvious that the man knew. He must have just been that much of an accepting person. "Oh, I've tinkering with this idea for a while, so I already have what it should look like." He pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Gekani. The man unfolded it and his brow rose. "Oh, and I want it to be made out of the same material as this," he said, taking off his orange, blue and white jacket. "Interesting idea. I'll see what I can do. Thanks, but listen, I have to go. Can you have it done by the end of today? The old man nodded. Good, I'll be leaving then, Naruto said as he walked out of the room and after giving Yuru one final glare, walked out of the store. Yeah, I'll come back here for sure. XXXXXX at the academy. After a nice breakfast, both Sanae and Kono were filled and ready to complete the rest of the day. Back in the Ichiraku district they got distracted by the sounds of their hunger. However, now they were satisfied and they were replete. Now they were ready to interrogate Naruto. However, the problem was that there was no Naruto. They walked into the classroom ready to interrogate their blonde friend, but they soon found out that he was nowhere in sight. Now they were stuck with Iruka and his horribly dry speech about moving on in the world. For almost 15 minutes they had been listening to Iruka go on and on about how he would miss us and how they would be moving on into the ninja world. They never really realized it, but Iruka knew how to bore crap out of a person. Kono leaned forward and whispered in her sister's ear. Hey, where do you think Naruto is? She asked her. I don't know, but he better come soon. It sounds like Iruka is about to finish. I hope he doesn't miss the team announcements. Sanae said. So in conclusion, what I'm trying to say is that I'm very proud of all of you, and that I am very proud to announce which genin teams will be assigned to which jonin. Iruka's voice cut through their conversation, causing both sisters to lock their eyes on the man. All right, without further ado, Iruka began, but his voice was cut off this time by a loud bang coming from the entrance to the classroom. Everyone turned their heads to see Naruto standing at the door. However, there was something missing, specifically a particular piece of clothing. Naruto stood at the door wearing a black t-shirt with an orange swirl on the back instead of his normal orange and blue jacket. Oh, glad that you could join us, Mr. Uzumaki. You're about 15 minutes late, but you're lucky. I was just about to announce the teams. Hurry up and take your seat. Naruto just sighed and slammed the door shut, and walked toward his seat near Sanae and Kono. Along the way he heard a multitude of whispers, mainly coming from the female portion of the class. He wasn't complaining though. It felt good to get complimented every once in a while. Most people didn't notice it underneath that heavy jacket of his, but he actually had an extremely muscled body. Underneath that padded fabric he was a brick house. And given how small his shirt was, his well-toned body could practically be seen from a mile away. The thin material did nothing but accentuate his body structure, and apparently that was a good thing, judging by the positive reaction of the girls in the class. My bad for being late, Iruka-sensei. I had some things to take care of, Naruto said cool as he took his seat. Well, that's okay seeing as how you all are getting new senseis, Iruka said with a smile as Naruto threw a smile back at him. He turned and flashed a smile toward Kono and Sanae. He noticed that their faces were an unusual hot red. Funny he didn't remember their faces this sanguine in the morning. His mind quickly came onto the conclusion that they were blushing and that it was due to his outrageously tight shirt. Then remembered what their mother had mentioned to him earlier in the morning, which caused him to smile to himself. It was time to have a little fun. Hey, are you guys okay? Your faces look a little red, he whispered as he placed his palms on both their foreheads. At the touch of his hands they both squeaked and flinched. I hope you guys aren't getting sick or something. It would if you girls both caught a fever, wouldn't it? Both girls just slowly nodded with their mouths open while staring directly at Naruto. Well, I hope it's nothing serious, he said as he turned fully around and faced Iruka. That should keep them occupied for a while, Naruto thought to himself. Meanwhile, Sanae and Kono had no clue what just happened to them. Of course they knew what Naruto had done, but they didn't know why they reacted like that. Both girls were in a daze and everything else outside of their minds had been tuned out except for Naruto. Kono looked at Sanae and noticed that her sister's face was about as red as a tomato. Her own expression matched Sanae's as well, which was confusing. She had been closer to Naruto before today, but for some reason when he touched her head she felt something different about him, something powerful and seductive. She knew that there was something different about Naruto. She could tell by the way he walked and talked, but she never figured that she would like it this much. Her own reaction to the blonde's noticeable change in aura had surprised her, and she didn't doubt that her sister was feeling the same way. Since when did Naruto become so different? She thought to herself. There was no change in outward appearance, but for those who knew Naruto, it was apparent that he had made a definite inner transition. Konoha made a quick glance at the back at Naruto's head but shuddered away, for she could just sense the power radiating off of him. Sanae, just like her sister, was in a state of inner confusion as well. It's strange, but when Naruto touched her, she felt her skin tingle. It was like some weird sensation running through her body, all hot and prickly, and it spread like wildfire. Unlike Konoha, Sanae had first noticed Naruto's physical appearance, not his change in aura. She had never really noticed it, but underneath that bulky orange jumpsuit, Naruto was as solid as a rock. Wow, since when was Naruto so ripped? Blood rushed to her cheeks and she found herself staring at him, but quickly turned away in fear of somebody catching her. Now wasn't the time to be staring though. As to why she was even staring, Sanae didn't want to admit anything to herself. She needed to be focused and alert. Just then Iruka's voice drew her attention back toward the front of the classroom. Every now and then she glanced at Naruto and saw that he wasn't paying attention, instead he was looking out the window. Normally she would have scolded him and told him to pay attention, but due to very appealing circumstance next to her, Sanae wasn't so sure how her words would come out if she were to try and speak to him. It was better for her to stay silent. As you all know, you will all be assigned to new teams, and along with that new Jonin senseis. The teams will be composed of 3 members. I will now announce the names of each of those teams. As Iruka began announcing the teams, Naruto did well not paying attention. Normally he would have in a situation like this, but as of now he really didn't care who was on his team. As long as it was not a fangirl. He wouldn't even mind having Konoha and Sanae on his team either, and apparently they really didn't mind having him for a teammate. No matter who was on his team, he would still get to use his power, so as of now he wasn't all that interested. Iruka went through many names, announcing the pairings and then going on to announce which Jonin they were assigned to. Some people were happy and others sad, some were gloomy and others mad, but to Naruto it did not matter. As long as he gets stuck with someone who wasn't completely incompetent, then he was alright. It had been 3 minutes and Iruka had gone through about 6 teams and was just about to announce the next team. Alright, Team 7, Haruno Sakura, Yu Uchiha Sasuke. The pink-haired girl let out a squeal of glee and flashed a victory sign to all of Sasuke's other suitors, letting them know that she had won. As I was saying, Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke and Inuzuka Kiba. Sakura then let out a low grumble upon hearing dog user's name. Your Jonin instructor will be Hatake Kakashi. Team 8, Hyuga Hinata, Aburame Shino and Uzumaki Naruto. Hinata's head instantly sprung up hearing the name of her blonde crush being mentioned along with hers. Naruto himself just glanced at her, making her look away. He then looked at Shino, to which the boy then looked back at him. The bug user's eyebrow shot up and hovered above his ever-present black sunglasses. Naruto looked away and shuddered. Man, that kid was weird. But whoever said that weird wasn't good? Naruto himself was weird, although he always labeled himself as unique. Guess one could say that Shino was odd, in some ways, but acceptable. Overall it was a decent team. They were a bit interesting and he wanted to see how well a Hyuga could collaborate with an Aburame. 2 diverging styles of combat meant that in order to make an efficient team they would have to work together like the gears in a clock, and that meant perfect synchronization. Your Jonin instructor will be Yuichi Kurenai. Seeing as how they're still as a Team 9, I'm going to skip onto the next team. Team 10, Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, and Akamichi Choji, your Jonin will be Sarutobi Asuma. Then Iruka took one final look at the paper in his hand and scratched his head. Oh, it seems like we had an odd number of students graduate this year. There are still 2 left over. The Fumina sisters. While lucky, looks like you two will be paired together on Team 11 and your Jonin will be Mitarashi Anko. Naruto glanced back at the Fumina sisters. Both their expressions were downcast. Just by hearing the name Mitarashi Anko they had both been thrown into a lugubrious mood. Sorry guys, tough luck. He whispered to them and turned back. Most likely that didn't even help. It probably exacerbated the situation, but then again, when did teasing ever help a situation? This rarely happens after graduation, Iruka continued. But don't worry, we will find a third teammate for your team. Anyway, now that you all know your teams, and Jonin instructors, all you have to do is wait. They will be here soon, so sit tight and be patient. Bye now. Iruka said as he made a hand sign and disappeared in a puff of smoke. That was weird. Iruka seemed like he was in a rush to go somewhere. And judging by the tone of his voice, the situation was urgent. Naruto made a mental note of that. Also, he noticed that Mizuki was gone as well. The man hadn't even bothered to show up for class. Well, as of now it didn't matter that much to Naruto. He just wanted to meet his Jonin. If he remembered correctly, he was assigned to Yuichi Kurenai, the Genjutsu specialist, well, more like master. Once before, while going through private shinobi files in Oji-san's office, he had come across her file. From what he read, his instructor was extremely skilled in Genjutsu, and apparently possessed the knowledge of over 1,000 Genjutsu. She was the Hitaki Kakashi of optical illusions. In the future she would prove to be an entertaining sensei, although not as entertaining as the Hokage himself. After 30 minutes of silence between him, Kono and Sanae, mostly everyone else had been picked up by their Jonin instructors. Now the only people in the room were Sanae, Kono, and the members of Team 8 and 7. The atmosphere was thick and silence permeated the air. Every time Naruto glanced at Kono or Sanae, he noticed their downcast expressions. Either they were sad about not being teammates with him, or their darkened expressions were caused by the knowledge of who their Jonin sensei was. Naruto knew who Mitarashi Anko was, and by the rumors surrounding her, he couldn't blame the 2 brunettes for adopting such perturbed looks. But he didn't let it pressure him too much. Their temperance was, in itself, a good distraction for them and would give him a chance to move away before they started to annoy him in order to make themselves feel better. Naruto's eyes darted from the 2 sisters, then onto Team 7, and then onto his own team, who were seated across the room. He stood up and walked over to him while eyeing the Aburame boy with much focus, not even breaking his concentration to so much as take his gaze off the aloof Genin. Hey, Shino, can I ask you something? He said, taking a seat on the desk next to Shino. From behind his high gray-colored collar, the Aburame boy nodded slowly. His thin-rimmed black glasses seemed to be glued to his face, for they did not move an inch when he moved his head. What is it? I presume that you have come to me in order to discuss the topic of our Jonin sensei. Shino's eyebrow shot up above his dark specs, correct? The boy was awfully perceptive, but Naruto had expected as much from a person from the Aburame clan. He did not look at Naruto, only away, as if he was avoiding the blonde's eyes. Wow, you hit the nail right on the head. Didn't expect you to answer before I had a chance to ask. But getting to the point, you do know of our sensei, correct? Yes, in fact I've heard a multitude of stories about her skill, particularly her mastery in the art of Genjutsu, Shino replied in a neutral tone. He brought his hand up and adjusted his glasses. Why, are you expecting anything of her? There he went again, predicting what he was about to say before he even said it. Actually yes, I am, And I am also expecting out of you and Hinata as well. This caused the usually distant boy to show some interest. He turned his full gaze onto Naruto, apparently drawn fully into the conversation by subtle alacrity, and uttered one word. Elaborate. Don't read too much into it. All that is meant is that I can see that you along with Hinata have skills that will prove to be both valuable and irreplaceable in the future. So to curtail, I'm glad to have you on our team, Naruto said nonchalantly. Your words are much appreciated. I myself am satisfied with you and Hinata as my teammates as well. Shino said. Naruto figured that he could get along with Shino. As stoic and shadowy as the boy was, he was still just that, a boy. And no boy, no matter how odd they may seem, could be completely unsociable. Naruto then took that thought back as the image of a certain Uchiha flashed in his mind. Naruto really hadn't expected Shino to open up so easily, however, but it didn't matter at the time, as long as he had lightened up the mood with his teammate. As he had made a slight connection with one teammate, he was pleased. However, one remained, and there she was timidly walking up to both him and Shino. Hinata slowly crept up to the two boys. Naruto today for some reason had changed. He seemed more confident than he was the day before. It reminded her of the day she first met him, when he had stood up to her father. Although she only had a brief conversation with him that day, he said something to her that she would remember for many years to come in the future. The words he said she still remembered. But you just got to know how to speak to them. His words still rang in her mind, a constant reminder of why she admired him so much. His confidence, his demeanor and his charisma, they had all returned back to their former glory just like on that day. His character wasn't just what she admired as well. Shallow as it may be, his physical features had become her daily eye candy. Most of the time she would stare at him for what seemed to her like hours, although it was only a period of time abundant in brevity. But her infatuation with Naruto was nothing whimsical. At times Hinata herself contemplated on whether or not her attraction to Naruto was just mere infatuation. To her it felt like more than some schoolgirl crush. It wasn't like the attraction that some of the females in her class had with Uchiha Sasuke. It was more than that. She just knew, and hopefully she hoped that one day Naruto too would one day feel the same way towards her. But until then, idle fraternization, she would have to settle for. Anyo, I was wondering, she began in her usual low tone. Her voice, however, was cut off by the dry grind of the door opening to reveal a black-haired woman standing in its rectangular frame. She wore a white and red dress that stopped at the high point of her thighs, was very beautiful. The most outstanding feature about her was her piercing red eyes, that almost seemed to bore into a person. She opened her mouth and said, "Team 8 meet me in training ground 19 in 10 minutes, before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. Well, I guess that was Kurenai. She seems interesting," Naruto said before getting up to leave. He gave Sanae and Kono one final wave, however they did not respond, for they were lost in deep emotional adversity. He went against any decisions to solace them and just went on his way. Shino stood as well and walked out as well, with Hinata slowly following behind. "Indeed, she is an interesting one," the bug user said as he followed Naruto to the roof. XXXXXX on the training field. Kurenai didn't waste any time getting to the training field. Although she didn't show it in the class before, she was actually excited about getting herself a team. Given that she had never been assigned a team before, she felt as though she could handle this team correctly. It seemed to her that she had actually gotten lucky. But for now she would test them. She had purposely given them a period of 10 minutes to get to training ground 19. She knew that it would take more than just 10 minutes for a genin to get there, most likely closer to 20 minutes. She just wanted to assess their speed before she got started. Underneath a large tree, she sat, enjoying the brief moment of peace before her team came here. The leaves loomed over her entire being, casting a cool shadow that saved her from the heat of the sun. The feeling it brought flowed throughout her body, giving her otherwise dry skin a break, and it allowed her to think clearly. Who did she have? Let's see, there was that Aburame. His clan's techniques utilized bugs to their every advantage. Although a very distant clan in Konoha, their prowess was well noted throughout the village. Some ways recognized their power better than others. She had only gotten to see an Aburame in battle a handful of times, but what she saw when they did was always surprising and in some ways disturbing. He would prove to be a beneficial asset to her team. Then there was Hyuga Hinata, the daughter of the current Hyuga clan head, Hyuga Hiyashi, and next in line to take the position of leadership. Kurenai herself had interacted with her many times in the past. She was a timid little thing. She had much potential, and although she used her family's gentle fist style of fighting diffidently, she showed much promise. If only her self-esteem issue would stop getting in her way, she might actually be able to improve herself, but it wasn't her fault. Kurenai blamed her father for the way Hinata turned out. His coldness and harsh actions toward his daughter turned her into the shy girl she was now. She thought of herself as a failure, and what was worse was that her father agreed with her. The thought of it sickened her, and she knew that Hinata's confidence was something that she had to work on with the girl. Lastly, there was the Uzumaki, Kyuubi's jailer. She didn't know what to think of this boy actually. She was never one of those ignorant villagers who thought of Naruto as the Kyuubi himself. Never would she stoop to such a low mindset. But she couldn't help but feel that he was hiding something. Whether or not he even knew of the Kyuubi's existence was still unknown. He seemed strong. However, would he be able to work with the other two on his team? Many rumors surrounded the boy, some saying that he was hiding his true power and that he was a ruthless fighter. That one's a mystery, she said to herself. Which one's a mystery? Said a voice. Kurenai's eyes widened when she looked up and saw Naruto standing upside down on a branch. He had a jaunty expression plastered on his face. For a moment the wind blew and Kurenai said nothing. Well, he said, raising a brow. Kurenai just sat surprised. There should have been no way that he could have gotten there so quickly. She herself had gotten there in little under 2 minutes, so for him to get there and approach her without her noticing was unnatural for a child his age. Why you? How did you get here so fast? She asked. That doesn't matter right now. I have someone who's here and wants to speak to you. Who could possibly? She cut herself off when she noticed an Anbu with a slightly modified tiger mask walk from behind the tree. What the hell is this? She asked. Kurenai-sensei. This is Yuji Saito, my future Anbu captain. Kurenai almost stopped thinking for a moment. The fact that he just Anbu meant that he was stronger than he let on, most maybe even stronger than she was. The concept of being weaker than a genin was a bit surprising. In fact, it was mind-boggling. There should have been no way that this boy could possibly attain Anbu rank. Still Kurenai sat and said nothing, dumbfounded by what might actually be reality. I had expected a reaction like that. There should still be more than 15 minutes before everyone else gets here. So you should use the time wisely and listen to Saito here has to say. Kurenai just nodded with her lower lip hanging off like she was an idiot. Saito then took over from there, promptly informing Kurenai of Naruto's situation and how he was to become an Anbu by next year. He told her of how Naruto would be training with them a lot in order to gain some experience before he was fully placed in his squad. The entire time Kurenai was silent, looking from away from Saito only to glance at Naruto, who had taken to cleaning out his ears. After he finished speaking, Kurenai only nodded. Well, I'm glad that you understand your student's position. I guess that I'm done here. He then glanced up at Naruto, and I'll be expecting you afterward. Yeah, Naruto said, not even bothering to look at his captain, completely focused on excavating the cave that he called his ear. With that, Saito bowed and walked behind the tree. When Kurenai looked to see if he was still there, her eyes widened, for he was gone. How do they do that? Naruto said, finishing her question for her. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that one out for myself. Kurenai eyed the boy carefully. It was true, she had gotten lucky. Who would have thought on her first genin team she would have a genin stronger than herself, but that only led to her feeling a bit off edge and insecure about her own ability. Naruto, she said. Yeah, what is it, Kurenai-sensei? He replied. It was a surprise that he still addressed her as his sensei, since he clearly outranked her when it came to skill. However, she swallowed whatever injured pride that may have attempted to show its head and asked him a question. What is it that you did to get so strong? Oh, it wasn't really just me, I got some help from our Hokage. That shocked Kurenai. And what do you mean by that? I mean, I was trained by him. Now Kurenai was intrigued. If he was brought under the eye of the Hokage, then who knows what type of techniques he had hidden in those rather tight sleeves of his. She would have to make sure to tell him to get some different clothing, if not then he had better be prepared to run from a couple dozen girls every day. Since I was 7 years old he trained me, taught me everything I know. And yet I still don't know how the Anbu do that vanishing thing. Interesting. Well, you can tell me more later, because I think that your teammates have finally arrived and a bit earlier than I expected. XXXXXXX. Shino was tired to say the least. He had actually pushed himself to make that 10-minute mark, whatever his sensei was trying to achieve by making him and Hinata rush to such a far-away training ground, he had no clue. Behind him a badly winded Hinata followed, dragging her feet against the dusty ground. Shino, isn't that Naruto sitting next to Kurenai-sensei? Shino, who had been looking at the ground the entire time, paused and looked up. Indeed, was Naruto sitting next to their sensei, staring into the sky as if he had been there for a long time and was bored. The boy's finely tuned intellect caused his mind to race to the one question that sprung up. How did he get here so quickly? He said between breaths. I don't know, he must be really fast, Hinata muttered. As the both of them approached the large tree, Kurenai motioned for them to come over. Well, you two look tired. Did you have a hard time getting here? Kurenai asked. A small but noticeable vein popped up on Shino's head. Hardly. I would just rather take my time. Kurenai then giggled. Oh, then why are you breathing so hard? I'd rather not speak about it, Shino said as he hid away beneath his large collar. Naruto let out a loud chuckle and Hinata herself suppressed a chuckle, although it was rather hard to laugh when you were as tired as she was. As Kurenai looked her team up and down, she smiled warmly. It seems as if she had gotten really lucky this first time. A Hyuga, an Aburame, and the ever-present mystery that was her most interesting pupil, Uzumaki Naruto. Yep, she had gotten really lucky.